They say loyalty is priceless until you ask to be paid what you're worth. My manager smirked when I brought up a 20% raise after 10 years of unwavering service. He didn't even try to hide it. That half-second curl of his lip told me everything. To him, my value was fixed, and I was foolish to think otherwise. My name is Lauren. I've been with the company for a full decade through mergers, restructurings, hiring freezes, and budget cuts. I was the steady hand in chaos, the one who stayed when others left, the quiet backbone of our data operations. I didn't climb the ladder for glory. I did it because I cared about the team, about the work, and I believed, naively perhaps, that at some point someone would notice. But what do you do when you realize your loyalty is being used as a discount? This year had been rough. My daughter just got accepted into college, an amazing achievement, but one with a price tag. My mother's medical bills were climbing fast. The rising cost of everything from gas to groceries meant I had to reconsider my finances. A modest raise wasn't just a one, it had become a need. So I asked. I didn't come in demanding the moon. I scheduled a meeting, prepared a one-page summary of my contributions over the past 5 years, and calmly explained why I was requesting a 20% adjustment to my salary. His response, a laugh, a short, sharp exhale through his nose, followed by 20%. Lauren, you know we don't do that here. That's not how internal promotions work. I tried to hold my composure, but something inside me broke, not because he said no, but because of the way he said it. Like I was naive, like asking to be compensated fairly was some childish fantasy. He went on to say that HR caps all internal raises at 10%, even that's rare. He added, as if to warn me not to dream too big. He wrapped it all up with a patronizing smile and a casual dismissal. If money's that important to you, maybe look outside. That night I sat in my kitchen staring at a college tuition bill and my mother's latest prescription invoice. I thought about the weekend I just spent cleaning up a broken data pipeline while he was golfing in Arizona, about the time I can let a family trip because the team was short-staffed, about how many times I'd said yes while swallowing the quiet no rising in my throat. And I remembered something. 3 weeks ago I had received a LinkedIn message from a recruiter. I never replied. It was still sitting there unread. I opened it. Hi Lauren, we're building a new team and your experience caught our eye. Would you be open to a conversation? I stared at it for a long time, then I clicked reply. I didn't sleep that night, not because of the recruiter's message, but because of everything that came before it. The smirk, the dismissive tone, the way he made me feel like I was asking for something unreasonable. I had spent 10 years believing I was part of something bigger. Turns out I was just convenient. The next morning I put on my usual calm expression and walked into the office like nothing happened. That's what we do, right? Especially women like me who've learned that emotion in the workplace is often seen as weakness. So I smiled, replied to emails, took notes in meetings, and even cracked a joke or two. But under the surface something had shifted. I began to pay closer attention to the subtle ways my efforts were invisible. My name wasn't mentioned during our last quarterly review, even though I'd pulled all-nighters to clean up a project that could have cost us the client. A junior analyst got praise for work I'd mentored them through. My manager used words like team effort when it was really doing the heavy lifting. I thought of all the missed birthdays, the plans, the late nights. I thought about how my daughter once asked, "Mom, do you even like your job?" And I didn't know what to say. I thought about how many times I told myself it'll pay off eventually never came. So I replied to the recruiter. We scheduled a call for Thursday. I told no one that week I worked harder than ever, not because I wanted to prove anything, but because I wanted to leave with my head held high. There's something quietly powerful about doing your job well, even after you've been made to feel small. That's the part they never understand. On Thursday, I slipped into a quiet conference room and took the call. The woman on the other end was direct but kind. She asked about my experience, my interests, and what I was looking for in a new role. I told her the truth. I want to be valued not just for what I do, but for who I am. I want to work somewhere where my silence isn't mistaken for weakness. There was a long Pause, then she said, "Len, I think you're exactly what we need." The following day, I had a formal interview. 2 days later, an offer landed in my inbox. 26%, that was the raise, more than I asked. My own manager for more than I thought I could even get, but the offer wasn't just about money. It came with something I hadn't felt in years: respect. The role would place me in a leadership position, guiding a small team and helping shape the company's data strategy moving forward. They didn't see me as a cog, they saw me as a voice. I sat with it for a night, then as a courtesy I messaged my manager, "If you're open to meeting the 20% we discussed, I'd be happy to stay. I love the team, but this new opportunity would be hard to walk away from." He replied, "3 hours later, we have policies in place. You know the cap. Best of luck." And just like that, my decision was made. I stared at his reply for a long time. "We have policies in place. You know the cap. Best of luck." Best of luck after 10 years of building systems, mentoring staff, smoothing client tempers, and sacrificing my personal life for quarterly deadlines. Best of luck was all he had to offer. I wasn't angry at the words themselves. I was angry at the casual way they dismissed me, as if I were just another folder in his inbox to be archived and forgotten. So I let the silence between us grow. No emotional farewell, no second guessing. I quietly accepted the offer from the new company and began drafting my to-notice, my last act of professionalism. I told myself in the days that followed I continued to show up and deliver as if nothing had changed, but something had. "People started to notice you seem lighter," a colleague said. Another joked, "You finally take a vacation or something." If only they knew I was simply free from waiting for recognition that would never come. Then came Friday. I walked into my manager's office, printed resignation letter in hand. He was on a call, gesturing animatedly, his eyes flicking toward me without acknowledgement. I waited silently, then set the letter on his desk and turned to leave. He ended the call abruptly. "Lauren, what's this?" I looked back. "My resignation, effective 2 weeks from today." He blinked. "You're leaving?" I nodded to where I smiled politely. An opportunity that met my expectations. The room fell silent. No jokes, no smirks, just confusion and something else. Panic, regret, maybe. Both. "Didn't think you'd actually walk," he muttered under his breath. Too late. The following Monday, the ripple effects began. First, a client emailed asking to speak directly with me. It was one of our biggest accounts, one I had personally on board and managed for years. They didn't want to talk to anyone else. They said they'd wait until Lauren's available. When they learned was leaving, they asked where I was going. I answered honestly. 3 days later, that same client notified my former employer that they were pausing their upcoming renewal pending internal changes. That may sound vague on the surface, but internally, everyone knew what it meant. They were following me, and it was more than just one account. Apparently, my departure had raised a red flag with multiple long-standing clients who were used to working directly with me. They weren't angry. I had always been honest and supportive, but they were disappointed, too disappointed to ignore it. I was stunned, not because I didn't know I had strong client relationships, but because I never realized how much those relationships mattered, how fragile loyalty really was when the human connection was removed. "Lauren, can we talk?" My manager texted midweek. Too late. I kept my final days professional but short. Wrapped up projects, handed over documentation, left everything clean. On my last day, there was no cake, no group email, no awkward goodbyes in the break room, just a quiet nod from the admin, a few hushed thank yous, and a surprised look from one senior VP I had once saved in a data compliance mess. It hurt a little walking out without fanfare, but it also felt right. And then came the call, not from my old manager, from a senior client executive, the kind of person who rarely reaches out directly. "I just heard you moved," he said. "If you're building something new, we want and keep us in mind." I was speechless for a moment, too surprised to answer, too validated to hide the smile in my voice. "Absolutely," I said. By the end of that week, my new employer had 3 new client inquiries, each initiated by contacts I had quietly built trust with over the years. I didn't pitch, I didn't persuade, I didn't even ask. They came because they believed in me looking back. I should have felt bitter, angry at the years I gave away, too cheaply furious at the way I was pushed out with a laugh in a half-hearted email, but I wasn't, because this was better than any apology. By Monday morning, the mood in my old office had shifted from awkward silence to barely concealed anxiety. Rumors swirled. 3 major clients had delayed renewals, the same clients I had spent years nurturing, guiding through contract changes, regulatory updates, and tech migrations. They weren't just accounts on a spreadsheet, they were relationships. My former manager had always taken for granted. He looked shaken, I heard from a colleague, one of the few I still trusted, that upper management had called him in for a closed door meeting. They want to know how you slipped through the cracks, she whispered, over lunch, and why no one tried to stop you. Too little, too late. I had always assumed I was invisible to the higher-ups. Apparently not. Turns out they noticed my absence the moment clients started asking uncomfortable questions like why wasn't Lauren retained and who's managing her transition. No one had an answer, and the worst part, my old manager had none. Either he hadn't planned for it because he never believed I'd actually leave. I think in his mind I was the kind of employee who'd grumble quietly, maybe update her resume, but never follow through. That miscalculation was about to cost him. By midweek, I received a text from another former colleague. He's in trouble. They're investigating how he handled salary caps and internal promotions, something about informal policies being used as excuses. While a part of me was genuinely stunned. I had always known there were politics behind closed doors, but I never expected them to unravel so quickly. One decision, one laugh, one denied raise, and now everything was shifting. Another day, another message, this one from HR. Hi, Lauren, we hope you're doing well. Would you be open to a conversation about your experience here? We're conducting an internal review. Too late, far too late. What surprised me most wasn't their sudden concern, it was how quickly they moved to damage control once clients got involved, when it was just me asking for fair pay. Laughed off, but now that business was being threatened, meetings, emails, investigations, how frustrating, and revealing that profit speaks louder than people. Meanwhile, at my new job, I was thriving. In just 1 week, I'd already been looped into key strategy discussions. My ideas were met with curiosity, not condescension. I was learning again, challenged, respected, seen. And then something unexpected happened. My new director called me into his office. We've been approached by a few of your former clients, he said. They asked for you specifically. We're open to onboarding them if you're willing to lead the transition. I was floored, not just flattered, floored. After years of being someone they hid in the background, I was now someone they wanted front and center. Yes, I said I'd be honored, and just like that, the tables had turned completely. Lauren, the woman who wasn't worth 20%, was now bringing in 6-figure contracts to a new company that recognized her value. 2 weeks after I started my new role, I received an anonymous message in my LinkedIn inbox. He's out. They reassigned him to an internal special projects team. No direct reports, no client access. I had to read it twice. Gone just like that. The men who laughed at me, who belittled my request, who joked about my lack of loyalty in front of the team, was now quietly swept out of sight, not fired. Of course, that would have made too much noise, but stripped of power, yes. Absolutely, I won't lie. Part of me felt stunned, not because he didn't deserve it, but because it happened so fast. I thought it would take months for consequences to trickle down. I underestimated how much pressure client trust can exert on a corporate structure. Apparently, the leadership team had uncovered more than just miscommunication. Several employees had come forward during the internal review, describing similar experiences: requests denied, performance overlooked, and promotions blocked for vague, unwritten reasons. Turns out he'd been using the 10% cap as an excuse to maintain control. HR had no record of such a policy. What struck me most was how many of my former colleagues messaged me quietly, thanking me. Your story gave me the courage to speak up. I always thought it was just me. I stayed too long, too afraid to look elsewhere. You showed it was possible. I never set out to be anyone's example. I Just wanted fairness, respect, a salary that matched my worth, but suddenly my quiet exit had become a ripple, and that ripple was now a wave at my new company. Things moved quickly. The clients who followed me over were on board within 2 weeks. I was asked to lead the integration team, bridging their systems into our workflows. Meetings that I used to be excluded from were now mine to run, and at the end of my first full month, my new director pulled me aside. "We'd like you to speak at the upcoming leadership round," he said. "Talk about your transition and what retaining top talent really looks like." I almost laughed, not from humor but from disbelief. Just weeks ago I was sitting across from someone who thought I wasn't worth listening to, and now I was being invited to speak about how companies should treat people like me. Too joyful for words. On the day of the round table, I stood in front of a dozen senior leaders, hands only slightly trembling. I spent 10 years doing everything right. I gave loyalty, patience, quiet resilience, and when I finally asked for something small, something fair, I was told to know my place. I did, and I left it. The room was silent. I went on to describe not the pain of being undervalued, but the freedom that came with finally walking away, the clarity, the quiet power of knowing your worth. After the session, one executive came up and said, "I wish someone like you had been here 5 years ago. We lost too many Laurens." That hit me harder than I expected. Later that evening, I opened an email from an old friend still at my former company. He shared a screenshot from an internal newsletter. My former manager's name was listed under a newly formed administrative operations group, buried near the bottom, just above office maintenance. Too ironic for words, but here's what truly. A second screenshot. This one was a quote pulled from their HR update. "We recognize the need to reevaluate our internal compensation guidelines to better retain and respect experienced contributors. Too little, too late, but finally something." I didn't feel vengeful. I didn't need to. The systems that once held me down had now in their own way validated every choice I made, and while they scrambled to revise policy and rebuild trust, one was already charting new territory, designing onboarding processes, mentoring junior analysts, and building something sustainable and fair. No one had to be torn down for me to rise, but some systems needed to break. It's strange how quiet victory can feel. There was no parade, no confetti, no cinematic moment of triumph, just the steady rhythm of work that mattered, the kind that filled you up instead of draining you dry. Each morning I arrived at my new desk, sunlight streaming through tall windows, coffee already brewing in the common area, and felt a calm I hadn't known in years. It wasn't about the raise, though. I'll admit the financial relief was real. It wasn't even about the title, though. I took pride in being called director by people who genuinely looked to me for leadership. It was about peace, about walking into a room and not needing to prove that I belonged. There one afternoon I passed a junior analyst pacing nervously outside the conference room. She had just presented her first proposal, and from the way she wrung her hands, it hadn't gone as smoothly as she hoped. I stopped. "You did?" "Well," I said softly. She looked at me. "Surprised you think so?" "I do," I nodded. "Your clarity stood out, and your idea on the predictive model, it's sharp. Don't second guess yourself just because the room is quiet." She exhaled, shoulders eased, and I saw in her eyes the same version of me 10 years ago, eager, competent, waiting for someone to say, "I see you." I made a mental note. No one on my team will wait a decade to feel valued. That night I posted a short note on LinkedIn, nothing dramatic, just a reflection. Sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's observation, and when the right moment comes, silence becomes action. Walk away when you're not seen, walk into where you're meant to shine. It was a quiet post, but it resonated. Dozens of comments came in, some from people I knew, most from strangers. People shared stories of staying too long in places that didn't grow with them. Some were still there. Some were finally gathering the courage to leave. The next morning my inbox held 3 unexpected messages, one from an ex-colleague who had once defended our old manager. She wrote, "I didn't see it before, but watching how things unfolded, I owe you an apology and maybe a thank you." Another from a former client now. At a new firm, are you taking on new partnerships? I'd love to collaborate. Again, and one from someone I didn't know. At all, your story gave me permission to expect more. Thank you. I sat there, reading those words slowly. It was overwhelming, but in the best way, because sometimes we think all we did was leave a job, but what we really did was change the story for ourselves and for the people watching, silently wondering if they could do the same. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was renewal, and somewhere I knew they were still talking about me at the old office, not in whispers of bitterness, but in questions. How did we let her go? Why didn't we listen? What could we have done differently? And maybe, just maybe, someone in that room is thinking, I won't make that mistake again. Weeks passed, and with every passing day I settled more fully into my new chapter. The pressure in my chest, the one I didn't even know I'd been carrying for years, had finally lifted. I was no longer trying to earn my place. I was trusted, not tested. I was invited into conversations, not kept at the edge of them. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't surviving, I was growing. There's a quiet kind of joy in waking up and not dreading your calendar. Sometimes in moments of stillness I think about how close I came to staying, how easily I could have swallowed the disrespect one more time, told myself to wait another quarter, another year, another empty promise, and how devastating that would have been. I now realized that leaving wasn't just an act of courage, it was an act of self-respect, a refusal to shrink in rooms that refused to expand. I didn't need to burn bridges, I simply built a better one and walked across it. What surprised me most was how many people followed, not in a literal sense, but emotionally. They watched my story unfold, not for the drama, but for the permission it gave them to reimagine their own. Sometimes it takes just one person to say enough, and suddenly others start seeing their own enough too. And to think it all began with a smirk, one small moment that told me everything I needed to know. If you've ever been told to wait your turn, to be grateful you even have a job, or that this is just how it works, I hope this story reminds you you are allowed to expect more. Your silence doesn't mean you're weak, and walking away is not failure, it's growth. Have you ever stayed too long in a place that didn't see you, or left and watched everything change because you finally did? I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below or share this with someone who needs to hear that. Yes, they are worth more. Let's keep this conversation going.